Hello, I'm Jan English Lewick. This YouTube video series profiles workplace anthropologists whose work directly influence their own workplace processes. The video series is part of a workshop in the Business Anthropology Matters initiative. As people increasingly spend their waking hours at workplaces, anthropologists need to understand those experiences. The practitioners profiled here have used anthropological skills to access, document, analyze, and relate the lives of workers and the businesses that employ them. Organizations employ anthropologists to understand a variety of worker-related issues within organizations, ranging from design to strategy. These interviews explore the practical, theoretical, and ethical issues that must be resolved to do workplace anthropology.
My name is Alexandra Mack. I am currently a senior fellow at Pitney Bowes. My background is more of, I guess, a traditional academic background. I have a PhD in archaeology. So I wrote a dissertation about pilgrimage in 14th to 16th century South India. Shows that I guess there's life after academia. Did learn partway through my PhD program when I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to follow that academic path, that there were anthropologists working in design. I actually encountered them at the Chicago AAA's, what probably would have been about 97 or 98. And so I actively pursued looking for jobs as I finished up my degree. I actively pursued looking for jobs in design firms. And I basically finished my degree and worked for a design consulting firm for a couple of years in the Boston area. And that led into then I've now been at Pitney Bowes for about 14 and a half years. So the opportunity at Pitney Bowes came up at the time. They were hiring into a small innovation group that worked a lot like what we sometimes think of as our front-end design groups, multidisciplinary groups, going out and talking to people, building prototypes. Over that last 14 and a half years, I've in some ways been in the same group, but with corporate reorganizations, a lot of that has changed around me. The now is very much different than when I was hired. And this will also speak to corporate change, I think. So the group I was hired into was called Concept Studio. There were about 10 people in it. At the time that I was hired, there was another anthropologist in the group. Her name is Jill Lawrence. She works for Crown now. She had been hired right out of undergraduate, mostly as an intern. And she was, and she still is, such a star that they went, oh, we like this anthropologist thing. Let's hire some more who maybe have more experience. So another anthropologist was hired at the same time I was. The group at that point had still largely been built out of engineers. I guess I should back up and say this had been a traditional engineering R&D, and the VP of the group had been exposed to anthropologists at Verizon and said, I want to do more human-centered stuff. So they originally kind of reorged around the people that were there, engineers, computer scientists, technologists, and then gradually started bringing in people like me, anthropologists, got some designers, brought in MBAs. So, that group built up kind of a really nice cross-disciplinary variety of people. In the larger, so I said this was about 10 people, but this was in a group which at the time I was hired was about 60 or 70 people. So the majority of those 60 or 70 people were still technologists, people with computer science degrees, or given this is Pitney Bowes, some physicists and chemists and mathematicians and cryptographers. I will step you through this history of things because it speaks to the group. About after I'd been here for about 3 or 4 years, there was a reorg just within this R&D group, because which is a good thing, because they were looking and saying, well, some of the areas that we're researching right now may not be as relevant. We need to think about newer technologies, newer things that we're doing. And they retained the Concept Studio, but what they did is they went to everybody in the R&D and they said, these are the new groups. Tell us which ones you want to be in. And I actually said, I know it's the obvious fit to keep me in this little front-end innovation group, but I want to go to a technology group because I want to see more, instead of kind of internally contracted projects, I want to do longer-term things and apply them to technologies. And they let me do that. So at that point, while this kind of maybe more design-oriented group still existed, I shifted over into a group that was focusing on internet technologies. And that gave me an opportunity. There were still some very, project-focused things, but it did enable me to do maybe slightly longer-term studies, things that didn't necessarily have a specific, okay, this internal stakeholder has asked for this thing. 2010, that's when there was a huge corporate reorganization. When the booze consultants come in, and they call it strategic transformation. And at that point, the overall group got cut in half. So this group of whatever 70 got cut down to about 40. So there was quite a lot of, bloodletting then. The concept studio group had been gradually, I think it still existed then, but what eventually happened is those people got moved over. The group stopped existing, and those people who were left got moved over into marketing. So I was still within this technology research group. Very different from, I used to have a group I used to be in a group that's about the size of the overall group I'm in, but that group was all focused on doing customer research and doing prototypes and taking things back out. And now I'm, sort of a standalone unicorn in the guy next to me in the next office is a cryptographer who he'd originally come in, he'd been doing a lot of stuff with security and cryptography, and he still does a lot with that, but he's adapted his skills and doing a lot with Internet of Things. He's a electrical engineer by training. The guy in the office on the other side is a social networking expert. So what we have now in this group are a lot of individuals. And there are some, yes, I have a team, but I'm also me. I'm Alex the Anthropologist here at Pitney Bowes. So at the level I'm at, being a senior fellow, I try and do what I can to sort of say, this is what I do, and this is what I can do for you. Right now, I'd say over the last couple of years, there's been way more pressure. I get even reluctant to say we're still an R&D group, because I don't think we're really R&D. We're sort of applied research. There's a lot of pressure to what can you deliver that's going to have an impact on the business this quarter? So I sometimes say I'm valued, but I'm less certain that what I do is valued, in as much as I feel like where I personally can deliver the most value is in this research that really looks out somewhat to the future and is somewhat strategic, versus research that is, okay, tell me what to do with my product today. So there's a tension between, and that gets interesting too. So both trying to sell the value of, hey, look further out. And so I get a couple projects like that where I do get a little bit of freedom, given the amount of it takes to say, I'm going to initiate a project, versus kind of getting pulled onto something that somebody senior wants, and trying to, both deliver a good job on that, but trying to learn more than that answer to the immediate question. So I would say a lot of what I've done over the years as in some ways, single practitioner is try to build a knowledge base, so that it's also not just about this one project. It's about, I have a lot of expertise, and I can add that expertise to other questions that we have. Today, the elevator pitch around it is, usually they are externally facing, so our customers are other businesses. So usually if I am doing research, it is, with particular types of people in businesses that are either our customers, or that, we would like to be our customers, or have some type of work they do or behavior that we're interested in. That's both given me lots of opportunity to observe internal things. And I'll go back to a more recent project I was on, and I guess all of them were in some sense under this broad rubric of innovation, but you start looking internally, and the more recent one from about 2014 to even last year, I was working in various capacities on, we now have this line is starting to be released, so I can say what it is. It's the Pitney Bowes SendPro line of products, and we'd actually hired a design consulting firm to travel around the world and do design research, and I went around the world with them for that. And then after their piece was complete, I was asked by the product manager to do some additional research around some of the concepts. Then he asked me to do stuff around designing end-to-end experience. Now, what I was really doing was not necessarily trying to do complete customer journeys that we think of with end-to-end experience. It was finding places where stuff was falling between the cracks of, that didn't have ownership internally, or the ownership was spread across different departments in such a way that things weren't going to be done well. So I spent a good year or so trying to finesse some, ways of us doing some, not so much the experience of the product, but, how are you going to get help from within the product? And that entailed, I've been like choreographing internal stakeholders and encouraging people to like think about doing things differently. And it really exposed a lot of internal workings in that way. So sometimes I knew, sometimes the product manager would say, talk to this person. And sometimes, you'd go from one person to another, and then find, well, who owns this? And then who on their staff are they putting on? So it was kind of a mix. Pitney is interesting, and some of that's changing. But while we're a very big company, we've gotten smaller because of divesting some of our businesses, and we have brought in a lot of newer people. But there's still a lot of people do know each other, so that is kind of nice. But there is this piece of understanding different people's. There's territoriality, certainly, in some instances, and there are some instances where there's, I guess it's a lot of different dynamics. I own this and I can do this. Some of what I would be seeing was different people had different objectives, and if you look at them individually, those are all really good objectives, but they didn't necessarily align together in a way that built up to that end goal. And so I would get people would say, that's not quite in my objectives, but I understand what you're trying to do, and I'll see what I can do around this. I'd also get people who were just like, we don't do that, So, and then we'd have to find somebody else who would. I had some opportunities to feed upward, hey, these things aren't aligned. These things aren't quite working. And we jury rig things together. And again, this speaks to corporate decision making. Not a lot changed. And then because at a certain point, a C-level person got very concerned with client experience and really started building out a team around that. And again, brought in Accenture. So then I started seeing all this stuff that was like, oh, we need to do this. Oh, we need to do this. And this beautiful Accenture deck that was like, oh, yeah, this is the stuff I was telling you like a year ago. So I think there's some interesting things around which voices get heard in which ways. So I think that more change being made in some of that now that it's kind of got C-level sponsorship. Now for international, I've got a different example for you. This is from a few years ago, and I actually have a small write-up on Sapiens of this project so that I can direct you to. So again, this was a project that came out of just an innovation group. This social networking expert wanted to do an internal social network. It was becoming very popular, and there was a vice president in one of our business units who he's a great guy, I sing his praises, who he was in charge of a big globally distributed group. And he was willing to kind of experiment with us and have his group. So this little, social networking thing got built and deployed, but as part of it, to kind of understand. So the idea was, I'm keeping this high level, but like a collaboration tool. So not just internal social networking, but the concept coming from this guy was, well, if people know each other better, then maybe they'll collaborate more. And so this group was about 90 people spread across 6 countries. I think it was, 5 countries, 6 time zones, something like that. And this particular VP said, this is great, do it with my group. So we were not only trying to get them to use this app, but I spent time talking to people across the world in this group. And in addition to being international, it had been built out of a lot of acquisitions along the way. So what emerged, so while this was a project done for innovation, and we were just saying, how do they collaborate? There were just a whole slew of workplace issues, collaboration issues, cultural issues that emerged. And as it happened, because of the nature of the guy who led this group, he was very interested in what we were learning and what kinds of shifts they could start to make to help people work together better. There is something about knowing each other. So the presence issue. So this isn't even just international, but the presence. So that who are you going to ask for help? So the idea was this tool kind of had to do with, well, if I know people and I know their expertise, I can ask them for their input. But what we were seeing was knowing people helps, but it's also talking to the people right around me. A great example of that was a woman who was in the Australia office, but she had actually lived in the UK for a couple of years and worked in the UK office. So she'd had direct interaction with both groups, and she was very clear. She's like, yeah, I know them all, I like them all, but now that I'm back in Australia, I don't ask the folks in the UK for anything. And when I was in the UK, I didn't lean on the people in Australia. I'm keeping this somewhat high level, but I hear that from other people or people who were alone in an office. So there were just some interesting things about what kind of, what does that space and distance do? There's another one, in an engineering group in India, and the folks in North America who tended to be very senior engineers. They really knew how they do things. One of the quotes from them was, "We're cowboys. We're just going to do it the way we do it." And they were very frustrated by working with the folks in India. Certainly there's a bigger time difference there. I think there was a bigger, if I can put it that way, cultural difference, even as much as the engineers in India tended to be more junior and younger. So maybe less instinctual in how they did things and needing more guidance from these senior guys who were feeling like this is just taking up a lot of my time to work with them, where I could be doing something else, and I'm being asked to give a lot of time to mentor, to train, to do all this for these guys. And then in Australia, which admittedly is also much, much closer time-wise, they had like a 4 or 5 hour time difference. The folks in the Australia office just loved having the engineers in India. They had more work than they could handle. They were closer time-wise. So they saw it as, oh my gosh, this is great because we can offload work. So some of it had to do with, culture and time, and some of it had to do with, well, there were senior people being asked to mentor across the world versus, oh my God, I've got more work than I can do, and here's these smart people who can do it for me. And I feel like, either because I'm far enough removed from academia or, I can say, everybody can say good and bad things about their company, but I do feel like I work for a company that has a pretty good ethical basis. I think, mostly, so I don't have I know some people have these great stories of this big conflict that came up. I don't have one that really comes up. I think the biggest thing always is that question of, anonymity, ensuring that you aren't putting people out there. So, people for instance, with this project, were very, very open with us and trying to make very certain that unless we had their explicit permission, that not only were we not saying so-and-so said this, we weren't putting it out there in a way that anybody could figure out that so-and-so said this. So that's, I guess, the main thing is making sure that you're, in my case with internal stuff, is making sure I'm protecting people. The biggest thing to be thinking about, and maybe it has to do with where I am in my career, I think there's a couple things. One is, the academic jobs don't come out of the woodwork, but neither do these. So I've certainly, if somebody's, coming to me to talk about a job because, this is their fallback from academia, I'm not very interested these days, even though there's a lot of us who've been out for a while who did come straight out of academia, and not to say you can't come straight out of academia, but we don't want to see somebody who's doing this because it's going to be hard to get an academic job. You want to see somebody who wants to do this because they can show on their resume or interview that this is what they want to do, and that they know what, and that they can talk to why the skills that they have, what they've learned in their PhD program or whatever. So it's very important to think about in terms of your skill set and how that will translate into this other world. And I do use skill set broadly because another danger I've seen And this has even been, say, in maybe, I'm very involved in Epic, in the Epic environment, is getting overly concerned. I don't want to say being overly concerned with being an anthropologist. Certainly, I feel like some of my secret sauce is the social science perspective I bring. There's a lot of design researchers out there, they bring a fantastic other secret sauce. So, understanding those skills and understanding what, say, differentiates you as an anthropologist with social science training, but to also be able to grow bigger than that. That if you want to grow in your career beyond being a user researcher, you have to then start to say, how can I apply this in other ways? What other skills do I have beyond I can go talk to people and really understand? So I'd also encourage people to think how to grow beyond being a user researcher.